My name is Lydia, and I'm 43 years old, the kind of woman who thought loyalty and family meant something, until I was proven wrong. For most of my life, I believed that if you loved people deeply enough, they would love you back with the same devotion. I believed that kindness was repaid with kindness. And for decades, I lived by that belief. Maybe that's why it hurt so much when I realized I'd been nothing more than an ATM with a pulse to the very people I called family. I live in a quiet corner of Vermont, the kind of small town where the snow piles high in the winter, and you can hear the church bells ring every Sunday morning. After my husband, Mark, passed away 7 years ago, the house we built together became my world. It's an old white farmhouse, the kind with creaking floors that sing at night and windows that rattle when the wind howls. But it's home full of memories, laughter, and the faint smell of lavender from the garden Mark planted before he died. We never had children. I always thought we'd have time. But when time ran out, I found comfort in my 3 nieces, Clara, Jenna, and Elise, my late sister's daughters. They were like the daughters I never had. I was there when each of them was born, when they took their first steps, when they graduated. I paid for Clara's nursing school, helped Jenna start her photography business, and even co-signed a loan for Elise's first home. I never thought twice about helping them. That's what family does, right? At least, that's what I thought. A few years ago, I started experiencing fatigue and shortness of breath. At first, I brushed it off. I figured it was just stress or maybe getting older. But then came the fainting spells, the pounding heartbeat that kept me awake at night. My doctor diagnosed me with early-stage heart failure. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it required careful monitoring and treatment. I had to attend regular appointments to track my condition and adjust my medications. My life depended on consistency. When I told my nieces about my condition, they all sounded concerned. "Oh, Aunt Lydia, you have to take care of yourself," Clara said sweetly. "You know we'll always be here for you," Jenna added. Elise, the youngest, hugged me tightly and promised she'd drive me to every appointment. Their words soothed me, and I believed them. After all, I'd been there for them their entire lives. Surely, they'd be there for me now. Weeks later, my cardiologist scheduled an important follow-up, a stress test, to evaluate how well my heart was functioning. It wasn't something that could be skipped. I couldn't drive long distances myself anymore, especially not in winter, so I asked Clara to take me. She was a nurse, after all, and she lived closest. She agreed without hesitation. "Of course, Aunt Lydia," she said. "Don't you worry. I'll pick you up at 8 a.m. Sharp." The night before the appointment, I barely slept. I laid out my documents neatly on the kitchen table: medical records, insurance cards, a small notebook with questions I wanted to ask the doctor. I even packed a little snack, peanut butter crackers, and a bottle of water just in case I got dizzy. My heart was fluttering with anxiety, but there was also hope. I trusted Clara completely. That morning, I woke up early, showered, and dressed in my warmest coat. The air outside was bitterly cold, the kind that stings your nose. By 7:45, I was sitting on the couch, my purse on my lap, waiting for the familiar sound of Clara's car pulling into the driveway. Minutes passed, then half an hour. I started to worry. Maybe she got stuck in traffic, I thought. Maybe she overslept. I tried to stay calm, but my heart started racing in my chest, that uneasy pounding I'd grown to recognize. Finally, the phone rang. Relief washed over me until I heard her voice. "Hey, Aunt Lydia," Clara said casually, her tone light, almost distracted. "Listen. I just wanted to let you know I had to cancel your appointment." I froze. "Cancel it?" I repeated, thinking I must have misheard her. "Yeah," she said. "Something came up with work. I called the clinic and told them you wouldn't be coming today." For a moment, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. "You canceled it?" I stammered. "Clara, this isn't a haircut or a lunch date, it's a cardiac stress test. I needed that appointment." "I know," she sighed, sounding annoyed now. "But it's not that serious, right? You can just reschedule." I felt my throat tighten. "I didn't cancel, Clara. You had no right." Relax, she interrupted, a hint of laughter in her voice. You'll be fine. And then she hung up. I sat there, staring at the silent phone in disbelief. My hands were trembling. My chest hurt not from my illness this time, but from something deeper. Betrayal. Pure, cold betrayal. I tried calling her back. No answer. I called the clinic next, desperate to undo the damage. The receptionist told me gently that the earliest new appointment was in 3 weeks. We tried to confirm the cancellation, she said, but your niece insisted you requested it yourself. That's when I felt something inside me break. Over the next few days, I tried to reach out to Jenna and Elise, hoping maybe they'd step in, show some concern, offer to help. But Jenna didn't answer, and Elise texted back only once. Sorry, Aunt Lydia, super busy this week. Can we talk later? Later never came. The house felt emptier than ever. The silence was deafening, no phone calls, no check-ins, nothing. Just the ticking clock and my own thoughts, echoing louder with every passing hour. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at the framed photo of my nieces, the 3 of them smiling, arms around me at Christmas years ago. I used to look at that picture and feel warmth. That night, I felt something else. A hollow ache. A slow burning anger. How could they? After everything I'd done for them? After all the sacrifices? The money? The time? I gave them everything, and when I needed a small piece of their time, they gave me nothing. As I sat there, my heart fluttering weakly, I realized something I should have seen long ago. Love without reciprocity isn't love. It's servitude. And I was done serving people who didn't deserve me. I went to bed that night with tears on my pillow, but when I woke up the next morning, there was something new in me, something cold, calm, and determined. If they thought my health didn't matter, I'd make sure their inheritance didn't either. My heart didn't just hurt from the disease, it hurt from their betrayal. For days after Clara canceled my appointment, I felt like I was walking through fog. Every heartbeat reminded me of her voice, that dismissive tone, that cruel casualness when she said, "You'll be fine." I kept hearing it over and over in my mind, like a record I couldn't stop replaying. I'd always known Clara could be self-centered, but I never believed she'd cross a line like this. Not with me. The days stretched into a quiet kind of misery. The house was so still that even the old grandfather clock in the hallway sounded cruelly loud. Each tick felt like it was counting down the time I might not have if I didn't get the medical care I needed. On the 3rd day, I decided to call the clinic again. The receptionist, a kind woman named Linda, recognized my voice immediately. "Oh, Mrs. Avery," she said softly. "I'm so sorry about the confusion. We thought you didn't need the appointment anymore." "I didn't cancel it," I said firmly. "My niece did, without my consent." There was a pause. "She sounded so certain," Linda said apologetically. "She said you were feeling better and didn't want to come." I closed my eyes, holding back tears. "That wasn't true," I whispered. "Please, when's the earliest new slot?" She hesitated, typing on her computer. 3 weeks, she said finally. "That's the earliest we can do." 3 weeks. My heart condition didn't wait politely on calendars. 3 weeks felt like an eternity. After the call, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, staring out at the frost-covered garden. Mark used to sit there with me in the mornings, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Now there was just me, a half-empty mug, and a phone that never rang anymore. That night, I tried calling Clara again, straight to voicemail. I called Jenna next, no answer. Then Elise. After the 5th try, she finally picked up. "Hey, Aunt Lydia," she said cheerfully, as if nothing was wrong. "What's up?" "I need to reschedule my doctor's appointment," I said quietly. "I could use a ride next week." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Oh, next week's bad for me. I've got a work retreat. Maybe Jenna could?" "Jenna hasn't been answering my calls," I said. "Well, she's probably swamped. You know how she is." Elise's voice softened, but I could hear the distance, that polite detachment that comes when people just want to end the conversation. "I'm sure you'll be fine, Aunt Lydia." That phrase again, you'll be fine. 3 little words that now felt like poison. When the call ended, I sat there in silence. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I felt something inside me shift, a breaking point I didn't see coming. I wasn't fine. Not physically. Not emotionally. And not morally. Because the people I had loved like my own children had just shown me how disposable I was to them. The next morning, I woke up determined to understand. Maybe there was a reason, maybe they didn't grasp how serious things were, so I decided to test that theory. I called Clara again, this time pretending to need help with groceries. "Clara, I'm feeling dizzy today," I said softly. "Would you mind picking up a few things for me?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then she sighed. "Aunt Lydia, can't you just order delivery or something? I'm heading out with friends." "I just thought," I began. "Look, I'll stop by sometime next week, okay? Gotta go." And she hung up again. I sat there staring at the phone, my jaw tightening. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. It was indifference. Cold, deliberate indifference. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, my slippers whispering against the old wooden floors. Every creak reminded me of how alone I truly was. My chest ached, not just from my condition, but from the realization that the girls I'd loved so fiercely had no intention of being there for me when I needed them most. I thought about all the things I'd done for them. Paying off Clara's tuition when her parents couldn't. Buying Jenna her first professional camera. Covering Elise's car payments when she lost her job. Every dollar came from my heart, not my wallet. It was love in tangible form. And yet, when I asked for one small favor, a ride, a little compassion, they couldn't spare an ounce of it. I tried to tell myself I didn't care. That I didn't need them. But that was a lie. Of course I cared. They were my family. Or at least, they used to be. 2 weeks later, my symptoms worsened. I started waking up breathless, with a pressure in my chest that frightened me. Nora, my housekeeper, noticed immediately. She'd been with me for over 10 years, through Mark's death and my declining health. She wasn't just an employee, she was family in every way that mattered. "Miss Lydia," she said one morning, her eyes full of worry. "You look pale. You should see the doctor." "I had an appointment," I murmured bitterly. "Clara canceled it." Nora's face hardened. "That's cruel." I nodded. "They don't care, Nora. Not anymore." She took my hand gently. "Then you need to start caring about yourself, Miss Lydia. You can't wait for people who won't show up." Her words stayed with me all day. That night I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames flicker and dance. I thought about how easily people could burn through your kindness, how they could take the best parts of you until there was nothing left. For the first time in my life, I stopped thinking like the forgiving aunt who made excuses for everyone else. Instead, I started thinking like someone who'd been wronged, someone who'd been used. If they could cancel something as vital as my doctor's appointment without a second thought, then maybe I needed to show them what it felt like to lose something they valued. Not out of cruelty. Out of balance. I realized something important that night. People like Clara, Jenna, and Elise only understood consequence. They'd been spoiled by my generosity for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to remind them that every action has a price. When I finally went to bed, I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. The decision had already begun forming in my mind, a quiet storm gathering behind my calm exterior. They thought my health didn't matter. But soon, they would learn what happens when the person they took for granted stops being their safety net. They had canceled my care. Next, I'd cancel their comfort. The pen trembled in my hand, but my resolve was stronger than ever. It was a cold Monday morning when I sat down at my kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming beside a stack of papers. The air outside was thick with fog, wrapping the house in a gray silence. I stared at the folder in front of me, my will the same one I had created years ago with love and generosity in my heart. Back then, I'd wanted to ensure my nieces would be taken care of when I was gone. Now, looking at their names printed in neat black ink, I felt something twist inside me. Each line that once symbolized love now felt like betrayal written in legal form. Clara, Jenna, Elise, they were supposed to be my legacy. Instead, they had shown me that I was nothing but a convenience to them, a source of money, affection, and attention when it suited them, and a burden when it didn't. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim light as I began to type a new document. The title felt heavier than I expected. Last Will and Testament of Lydia Avery. Those words used to scare me because they meant an ending. But now, they felt like a beginning, the start of something deliberate, powerful, and right. This time, I wasn't writing out of love. I was writing out of clarity. The house, my beautiful old farmhouse with the wraparound porch and the garden Mark built. In my original will, I'd split it evenly among the 3 nieces. Now, I deleted their names one by one and replaced them with a single one, Nora Hill. Nora had been with me through sickness and grief. She had cooked my meals, driven me to appointments, and sat beside me in silence when the pain in my chest became unbearable. She had never once asked for anything in return. If anyone deserved the comfort of this home when I was gone, it was her. Next, I looked at the section about my savings and investments, the inheritance Mark had left behind. I'd divided it neatly between the girls years ago, but now, that money would serve a higher purpose. I created a new clause. Upon my passing, all funds are to be transferred to the Vermont Heart Wellness Foundation, with a portion designated for the establishment of the Avery Transport Fund, a program providing free transportation for elderly or disabled patients to medical appointments. As I typed, a strange warmth spread through me. For the first time in months, I felt in control again. My anger wasn't gone, but it had transformed, no longer a raging fire, but a steady flame lighting the path forward. When I finished drafting the basics, I called my lawyer, Mr. Hayes. He'd managed my legal affairs for nearly 2 decades, a kind man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. Lydia, he greeted me warmly. I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How have you been feeling? I've been better, I said quietly. But I need to update my will. Of course, he replied. Anything in particular prompting this change? I hesitated. I didn't want to sound bitter, I wanted to sound clear, resolved. Let's just say I've realized some people value my money more than my life, and I don't intend to reward that. He was silent for a moment before saying softly, Understood. I'll schedule time for you to come in this week. We'll make it official. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the computer screen again. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page, waiting for me to add more. I decided to include a letter not for the lawyer, but for the nieces themselves. A final message they would receive only after I was gone. To Clara, Jenna, and Elise, you once promised you would always be there for me. I believed you. I believed every sweet word, every smile, every I love you. But when I needed you most, your absence was louder than any apology could ever be. I don't write this out of spite, I write it out of truth. You canceled my care when I needed it most. So, I canceled the inheritance you took for granted. My wealth will now serve those who still understand compassion. I hope one day, you'll learn the difference between love and convenience. When I finished typing, I read it twice. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't vengeful, it was honest, painfully honest. That evening, I printed the document and placed it in a folder, marked private. I tucked it into my safe, next to my old jewelry box. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next day, I drove to Mr. Hayes's office in town. Nora insisted on coming with me, worried about my health, and I let her. The roads were icy, but the air felt crisp and cleansing, like winter was finally lifting. Mr. Hayes greeted me in his office with a smile. He looked at the new will, reading it carefully from start to finish. When he was done, he looked up at me and nodded. This is very clear, Lydia. I'll make sure it's notarized and legally binding. Thank you, I said softly. He hesitated before adding, You know, Lydia, sometimes clarity brings peace faster than forgiveness ever could. That line stuck with me. Clarity, not forgiveness. That's exactly what I was seeking. Before I left his office, I asked him for one more thing. "Don't tell anyone about the new will," I said. "Not until I say so." He smiled knowingly. "Understood." As Nora and I drove home, the sun began to set behind the hills, casting long golden light across the snow. It was beautiful and haunting. When we arrived, I went straight to my study, opened my journal, and began to write. I needed to make sense of the storm brewing inside me. They think I'm weak because I'm sick. They think kindness equals stupidity. But they're about to learn that even a fragile heart can deliver the sharpest lessons. I closed the journal and stared out the window at the darkening sky. The house felt different that night, lighter, somehow. For months, I had been carrying guilt and sadness like stones in my chest. But now, I felt something entirely new. Anticipation. I knew this wasn't just about changing a few documents. This was about reclaiming my power, about teaching them a lesson they would never forget. The next time I spoke to them, I wanted to look them in the eyes and know something they didn't, that their entitlement was about to cost them everything. And to make that moment truly satisfying, I needed to see just how far their greed would go. Because if greed was their disease, I was about to become their cure. I called them one by one, pretending nothing had changed. It was a cold Thursday morning when I picked up the phone. The winter light slanted through the curtains, pale and unforgiving, as if even the sun didn't believe in warmth anymore. My new will sat safely locked away in my study, the ink dry, my decision final. But before I let them face the consequences, I needed to see them for who they truly were. Not as the sweet girls I once tucked in at Christmas, but as the women they had become. So, I decided to test them. The plan was simple. I'd ask for small favors, the kind that required time, not money. Nothing grand, nothing unreasonable. Just opportunities for them to show compassion. I wanted to give them one last chance to prove that I'd been wrong about them. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. I started with Clara. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Hey, Aunt Lydia. Long time no talk. Have you been?" I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see me. "Oh, keeping busy. I've been feeling a little lightheaded lately. My doctor wants me to pick up a new prescription, but I'm not supposed to drive until my next test. Would you be able to take me to the pharmacy later this week?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, just the faint click of her keyboard. "Oh, shoot," she said finally, her tone coated with fake regret. "This week's tough. I'm working double shifts at the hospital. Maybe Elise can take you?" I forced a small chuckle. "Of course, dear. I know you're busy." "Yeah," she said quickly, relieved. "I'll call you soon, okay? Love you." And just like that, she was gone. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the dial tone humming in my ear. She didn't even ask if I was okay, didn't even ask what the medication was for. Next, I tried Jenna. She'd always been the most self-absorbed, though she disguised it with her free spirit act. She fancied herself an artist, always taking pictures of sunsets, posting motivational quotes online, pretending to be deep. When she picked up, her voice was distracted, like she was in the middle of something she didn't want to pause for. "Hey, Aunt Lydia. I saw your comment on my photo. Wasn't that sunrise amazing?" "It was beautiful," I said softly. "Listen, sweetie, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I need a ride to the grocery store this weekend." "It won't take long." There was a long pause, then the sound of muffled laughter in the background. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't. I'm shooting a wedding this weekend. You know how busy I get with my photography gigs." I nodded to myself, though she couldn't see it. "Of course, you've got a business to run." "Exactly, but I'll stop by soon, I promise." "Sure," I said. "Take care, Jenna." The line went dead. I looked around my quiet living room, the ticking clock marking the seconds between disappointment and understanding. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Still, I had one more call to make. Elise, the youngest, the one who used to sit on my lap and braid my hair when she was little. She'd always been the kindest, or at least I thought so. Maybe she'd prove me wrong about all of them. When she answered, Her voice was bright and chipper. "Aunt Lydia? I was just thinking about you." That line alone almost made me smile. "Really?" I asked. "Well, that's sweet to hear. I could actually use a bit of help this weekend, if you're free. My heart's been acting up again, and I need someone to take me to my follow-up appointment. It's only a 30-minute drive." There was a pause, short, but enough for me to know what was coming. "Oh no, I wish I could," she said finally. "But Ryan and I are heading out of town for a friend's engagement party. It's been planned for weeks." "I understand," I said softly. "Maybe I can come next week? Bring you some dinner or something?" "That's okay," I replied. "Don't worry about it." When I hung up, the silence felt heavier than usual. I sat there for a long while, the phone still in my hand, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the window panes. My chest felt tight, not from my condition this time, but from the final confirmation I didn't want to admit. They had all failed the simplest test of compassion. It wasn't that they couldn't help. It was that they wouldn't. I stood and walked into the study, the familiar smell of old books and cedar wrapping around me like comfort. I opened my journal, the same one I'd been writing in since Mark passed, and I started recording everything. Every conversation, every excuse, every dismissive tone. I even noted the exact times and dates. Not out of paranoia, but out of purpose. If there was ever a day when they tried to deny their selfishness, I wanted evidence. That night, as the wind howled outside and the old house creaked with age, I sat by the fireplace and thought about what came next. My anger had crystallized into something sharper, colder. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was strategy. They'd shown me who they were. Now it was time for me to show them who I could be when I stopped being the forgiving aunt. I started planning the next step. Something that would look like kindness, but in reality, would expose their greed for the whole world and themselves to see. I wanted to watch their fake smiles falter. I wanted to see their masks crack. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. I would invite them back into my life, not with bitterness, but with sugar-coated grace. I'd act as though all was forgiven, as though I'd decided to move on. I'd even make it seem like I was revisiting my estate plans and wanted their input. That would bring them running. Because if there was one thing my nieces loved more than pretending to care, it was the scent of potential money. I spent the rest of the night making notes in my planner, outlining each step carefully. The dinner invitation, the script I'd follow, the questions I'd ask, and most importantly, the hidden recorder Mr. Hayes had given me, the one I'd use to capture every word that slipped out of their greedy mouths. By the time I went to bed, I felt calm. Not joyful, not relieved, just calm, like a storm right before it breaks. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear Clara's voice again, laughing as she canceled my appointment. "You'll be fine," she'd said. And now, as I drifted to sleep, I whispered the same words into the darkness, but this time, they sounded different. "Yes," I murmured. "I'll be fine, better than fine." Because tomorrow, the real game would begin. They thought I was weak. They thought my kindness was endless. But they were about to learn that even the gentlest hearts can deliver the harshest lessons. They had failed every test of love. And now, my revenge plan officially began. They said I was too kind for my own good, so I used kindness as my camouflage. The idea for the dinner came to me on a quiet afternoon while I was folding laundry. It felt almost poetic. Offer them the illusion of warmth and watch greed bloom in plain sight. If they were going to take from me, I would make them show their hands first. I wanted to see those hands reach not for hugs or for comfort but for inheritance, for property, for the small, glittering things that had always distracted them. I wanted to record it all. I spent the week preparing as if I were staging a small play. The menu was simple but thoughtful: chicken with lemon and thyme, roasted root vegetables, a salad with feta and walnuts, and Mark's favorite lemon tart for dessert. I cleaned the house until it hummed, polished the silver, fluffed the throw pillows, and put fresh flowers on the dining table. Nora helped with the cooking and smiled when I explained my plan without ever knowing the full truth. She simply hummed and said, "You're doing fine, Miss Lydia." Her steadiness steadied me. Invitations were polite and warm. I called each niece personally, keeping my voice light and practiced. "I'd love for you to join me for dinner on Saturday," I told them. "I miss our family nights." Clara promised immediately, too eagerly. Jenna hesitated, then offered a non-committal yes. Elise squealed that she couldn't wait and would bring a bottle of wine. Hearing their quick agreement felt like the first small victory. They were still hungry for the scent of my kitchen and the rumor of inheritance that lingered in the town like pollen. On Saturday, I dressed in a soft gray sweater that complemented my eyes and a simple pearl necklace that Mark had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look approachable, not frail. I wanted them to underestimate me. Nora set the table, placing their napkins at each setting as if arranging the pieces on a chessboard. The recorder Mr. Hayes had given me sat hidden beneath the centerpiece, its small red light tucked under a sprig of rosemary. I told myself I wasn't being petty, I was being prudent. They arrived in pairs and individually, smiles polished and voices practiced. Clara hugged me first, her perfume too sweet, her grin a touch too wide. Jenna kissed my cheek with a quickness that suggested performance rather than affection. Elise lingered a second longer, her eyes glassy with what might have been real concern. For a brief moment, something inside me softened the tiny part that still wanted to believe. Then I remembered the cancelled appointment and the nights I spent counting my heartbeats like a prisoner counts the bars. Dinner began with laughter and small talk. I asked about Clara's shifts, about Jenna's latest photography exhibit, about Elise's boyfriend. They answered with the same level of engagement they used when someone was looking. We toasted to small things, to health, to family, to the season. I listened more than I spoke, letting them fill the air with their voices, soft and demanding all at once. When the plates were cleared and the lemon tart had been devoured, I steered the conversation slowly toward the reason I'd invited them. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I said carefully, folding my hands. "About Mark, about life, and about how I want things to be handled when I'm gone. I might update my will, and I thought it would be fair to include you in the conversation." At that, their faces shifted almost imperceptibly at first. Then, like actors slipping into their roles, Clara leaned forward, eyes bright. "Oh? You'd want our input?" she asked, voice suddenly syrupy. Jenna's camera phone went into her lap, forgotten for once, as she regarded me with a new interest. Elise's fingers played with the stem of her wine glass, hope written in each tiny movement. I asked a few gentle leading questions. Did they want the house to remain in the family? Would they prefer liquid assets? Were there sentimental pieces they imagined keeping? Each question was a thread, and they tugged, revealing priorities. Clara spoke freely about the practicalities of selling the property and distributing funds. She even mentioned possible buyers she knew through the hospital network. Jenna mused aloud about the unobstructed light in my study and how perfect it would be as a small studio. Elise, quieter, admitted she found it hard to think about money, but then quickly added she'd help care for the house if needed and conveniently mentioned her friend who worked with estate agents. The more they talked, the more their true motive surfaced. The property's value, the inheritance's potential to solve immediate debts, the small trinkets they pictured as keepsakes. They chuckled over imagined renovations and pretended to romanticize memories while their words measured balance sheets. I let them go on, smiling like a woman pleased at her niece's engagement, while inside I catalogued every phrase and every slip. The recorder beneath the rosemary captured cadence and greed, enthusiastic plans and casual dismissals. I felt oddly light, as if a weight had lifted away because I was no longer blind. At one point, Clara reached for the antique box on the mantel, the one Mark had carved himself, and joked, "That little thing would look lovely in my living room." Jenna chimed in. "The China collection, remember, Aunt Lydia? You always said I had an eye for vintage. I'd love to have it." Elise nodded, eyes downcast, but later admitted she'd imagined the crest from my jewelry chest. Each comment landed like a coin in a jar I intended to break open. Their appetite for my life's remnants was plain, and they said it with such casual entitlement that I felt no remorse in my next steps. When the night wound down and they tidied their plates, I walked them to the door with a graciousness that felt like armor. They hugged me, cheeks warm and practiced. They thanked me for dinner as if I'd fed them a favor. Once their cars disappeared into the dark, I sat at the table and listened to the house exhale. In the quiet, I played the recording back on the small player Mr. Hayes had given me. Hearing their own voices, unfiltered and eager, made my stomach flip, but not with regret, with resolve. The evidence was there, clearer than any memory or resentment I could conjure. It was real. It was theirs. I made a note in my journal. They took the bait. I underlined it twice. I slept that night with the recorder's weight in my pocket, feeling both vulnerable and empowered. I had shown them my heart literally, and they had shown me theirs. It would be enough. And when the time came to reveal everything, I wanted to watch their faces when they heard themselves confess to their own avarice. I wanted them to feel the sting of being seen, because they had canceled my appointment, thinking I'd quietly slip away. They had no idea I was preparing to rewrite the ending. They were in for a shock they'd never forget. Sometimes the best revenge begins with silence. After that dinner, I let the house go still. I didn't call, didn't write, didn't answer their cheerful texts that popped up for 2 days before fading away again. The quiet felt strange at first, but soon it became delicious. My phone, once a leash of obligation, sat face down on the counter like a retired weapon. I wanted them to feel the vacuum. For people who measured affection in access, absence was the only language they would understand. A week passed before Clara called. "Aunt Lydia, just checking in," she said, her voice airy and guilt-proof. I could almost hear the question she wasn't asking. "Had you spoken to your lawyer yet?" "I've been resting," I replied. "Taking a little time for myself." "Well, that's good." I was worried. I smiled to myself. "No need. I'm in good hands." That was true. They just weren't her hands. 2 days later, I packed a single suitcase, warm clothes, my journal, medication, and a folder of documents Mr. Hayes had drawn up for me. Nora watched me from the doorway, brow furrowed. "You sure about this, Miss Lydia?" "Yes," I said. "I need to disappear for a bit, let them wonder." She didn't argue. Nora had seen too much in life to question a woman who'd reached her limit. I left her in charge of the house, the bills, the plants, and the mail. Only she and Mr. Hayes knew where I was going. A quiet rehabilitation center on the edge of Burlington that doubled as a retreat for cardiac patients. I checked in under my maiden name, Lydia Coleman, and asked them to keep my stay private. The nurses were kind, the food bland, the lake view magnificent. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for my phone. The staff treated me like any other patient, not a fragile aunt or an aging benefactor. I took slow walks along the frozen path, breathing in air so cold it burned. Every day I wrote in my journal notes. Thoughts. Pieces of memory I wanted ready when the time came. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore, it was about balance. After a week, Mr. Hayes visited with updates. "Everything is filed and protected," he said. "If anything happens to you, Nora will contact me directly. Your nieces have no legal claim now." "Good," I said, sipping weak tea. "Let them guess." He smiled faintly. "Are you ready for the next part?" "Oh yes," I said. "It's time they start tasting worry." While I rested, I asked Nora to answer their calls but offer no details. If they asked where I was, she'd simply say, "Miss Lydia's getting the care she needs." It was the truth, just not the whole of it. Within days, my silence became rumor. Clara texted Nora late one night, "Is Aunt Lydia okay? I heard she's not doing well." Nora replied, "She's being looked after." That was enough to send them spiraling. From my quiet room overlooking the lake, I watched the world shrink to snowflakes and reflection. I had thought isolation would feel like punishment, but instead it felt like purification. The noise of their constant taking had finally gone quiet. 3 weeks later, my doctor pronounced me stronger. "You've been following instructions," he said. "Your heart sounds better than last month." "I've been eliminating stress," I told him. He smiled. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I checked out 2 days later, feeling lighter and oddly reborn. Before heading home, I stopped by Mr. Hayes's office to sign the last set of papers, a charitable trust fund in my name, already seated with the first transfer. When you're ready to tell them, he said. This will make quite the statement. I'm not ready yet, I replied. They still have lessons to learn. Back home, Nora greeted me with her usual calm. They've been calling more, she reported. Even Jenna came by yesterday. She looked nervous. Did you tell her anything? Just that you were resting. She left flowers, cheap ones from the grocery store. I laughed softly. Perfect. That evening I sat by the fire, reading through the notes Nora had kept of their visits and calls. It painted a picture I'd expected. Curiosity tinged with panic. Clara had asked if I'd updated my will. Jenna wanted to know if the house was still in your name. Elise had cried, real or not. I couldn't tell and begged Nora to have me call her. Their fear was my evidence. It confirmed everything I needed to know. I waited another week before making the next move. From my desk, I wrote 3 identical letters in careful handwriting. My dear girls, I appreciate you thinking of me. I've been taking time to reflect on my health and my affairs. Please don't worry. I'm in good hands and will be in touch soon. Until then, focus on your own happiness. With love, Aunt Lydia. Each envelope carried only those words, nothing more, nothing less. I mailed them without a return address, then sat back and let the silence grow again. The responses were almost immediate. Clara called 3 times the next day. I ignored each ring. Jenna sent a photo of the 3 of them together at Christmas, captioned, "Miss you." Elise left a voicemail that broke halfway through with a sob. I listened once, then deleted it. They were starting to feel the tremor of uncertainty, the same helplessness I'd felt when my appointment vanished with one careless phone call. And I wasn't finished yet. A week later, I made a few subtle changes. Canceled a small automatic transfer they each received annually, moved my savings into a new account, and redirected my mail to Mr. Hayes's office. To them, it would look like chaos, like a sick woman making erratic decisions. They'd gossip, speculate, and fight among themselves. The beauty of the plan was that I didn't have to lift a finger to create discord. I simply withdrew my presence, and the cracks widened on their own. Nora and I spent quiet evenings by the fire, her knitting, me reading. Sometimes she'd look up and say, "They're worried, you know." "I hope so," I'd answer. Worry is a fine teacher. By the end of the month, I was ready to reappear. The next step required precision and performance. I told Nora, "We'll invite them again, one dinner, but this time, they won't be dining with the same aunt who begged for their help." She smiled knowingly. "You're planning something." "Yes," I said, staring at the reflection of flames in the window pane. "A revelation." Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote a single line across the page. They wanted my fortune. They will inherit the truth. I slept deeply that night, dreamless and steady, as if my heart finally understood that justice sometimes comes softly disguised as absence, wrapped in calm. When morning came, I brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and let the light flood in. The winter air smelled cleaner, almost forgiving. I had vanished from their world just long enough for them to forget my strength. Now I would remind them. Because disappearing wasn't retreat, it was strategy. And soon, I would return not as their dependent aunt, but as their reckoning. They wanted my fortune. Now they were about to inherit the truth. I returned home looking frail but feeling powerful. It had been almost 6 weeks since that dinner, 6 weeks since I'd disappeared into the silence I created. The winter snow was melting into muddy puddles when I decided it was time to re-emerge. My heart was stronger, my will sharper, and my resolve unbreakable. I no longer felt like a fragile aunt dependent on my niece's mercy. I was something different now, deliberate, steady, and armed with truth. I called them each on a Wednesday morning. My voice trembled just enough to sound vulnerable. "Clara, dear," I began softly. "I'd like to have a family meeting this Saturday. It's been too long." There are some things I'd like to discuss about my future and my estate. There was a pause, then the sound of her excitement trying to hide behind fake sympathy. Of course, Aunt Lydia, I'll be there. I was actually just thinking about you. I smiled to myself. I'm sure you were. Jenna and Elise agreed just as quickly. I heard it in their tones: relief, curiosity, greed, all blending together like perfume trying to cover rot. They thought this was it. They thought I was weak, sentimental, maybe even regretful. They were coming not out of love, but anticipation. And that was exactly what I needed. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly. The kind of day that made everything feel heavy and intimate. Nora helped me set up the living room, a tray of tea and cookies, the fireplace burning low. I wore a long cardigan, soft slippers, and my reading glasses perched on my nose. I wanted to look fragile enough to disarm them, but not so pitiful that they'd sense the trap. Mr. Hayes arrived early, carrying his leather briefcase. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Lydia?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "It's time they heard themselves." He nodded. Setting up the small speaker beside me on the table, the one connected to the recording I'd made during that last dinner. When the doorbell rang, Nora ushered them in. Clara came first, all perfume and pretense, her nurse's uniform replaced by a tailored jacket that screamed success. Jenna followed, holding her phone like an emotional shield, snapping photos of the house as if cataloging future property. Elise lingered near the doorway, softer, guiltier, or at least pretending to be. "Aunt Lydia!" Clara exclaimed, rushing forward. "You look wonderful, we were so worried." I smiled faintly. "Worried? That's sweet. Please, sit down. We have things to talk about." They settled in on the couch, side by side, the tension under their smiles almost visible. Nora served tea silently, then disappeared into the kitchen. I could feel the anticipation radiating from them, like children waiting for a teacher to hand back test results. I took a slow sip of tea before speaking. "I appreciate you all coming. I know it's been complicated between us." They nodded, feigning concern. "I've had a lot of time to think these past few weeks," I continued, "about my health, my life, and what legacy really means. I realize that money and property mean very little if the people you love don't value the person behind it." There was a flicker in Clara's expression, something nervous, defensive. Jenna cleared her throat, perhaps preparing another performance of affection. Elise just stared into her cup. "I want to show you something," I said softly. "Something that helped me make peace with my decisions." Before they could respond, I pressed play. The recording began with the gentle clink of silverware and the sound of laughter from our dinner weeks ago. Their laughter. My voice followed, light and polite, asking them about the estate, about what they thought should happen to the house and the money. And then came their answers, word for word, tone for tone, dripping with greed and entitlement. Clara's bright, eager suggestion to sell the property fast before it loses value. Jenna's comment about turning my study into her art studio. Elise's soft, reluctant voice saying she'd take care of the house if she could get help with the taxes. Each word played into the silence of the living room like confession. At first, they didn't react. They just sat there, faces frozen, pretending not to recognize themselves. Then Clara spoke, her voice brittle. "Aunt Lydia. This is out of context." "Out of context?" I repeated quietly. "I asked what you wanted after I was gone, and you answered." Jenna set her cup down too hard, tea spilling onto the carpet. "We were just talking hypothetically. You asked us." "I did," I said calmly. "And your answers told me everything I needed to know." Elise was crying now, hands trembling. "I didn't mean any of it like that," she said softly. "I just didn't want the house to fall apart. I love you, Aunt Lydia. You know that." I looked at her, and for a brief second, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the text she never answered, the promises she never kept. The image of me sitting alone, waiting for a ride to the pharmacy that never came, pushed away any mercy that tried to rise. "I don't doubt you love me," I said gently. "But love isn't words, Elise. It's presence. And when I needed you, all three of you chose convenience over compassion." Clara stood abruptly. "So what is this then? A guilt trip?" "No," I said, my voice steady now. "This is closure." I reached for the folder beside me and slid it across the coffee table toward them. The gold lettering on the cover read, "Avery Estate, Final Revision." Clara's face paled. Jenna reached for it, flipping it open to the first page. As her eyes scanned the text, her lips parted in disbelief. "You changed it," she whispered. "You actually—" "Yes," I said. "The estate has been rewritten. My assets will now fund the Avery Foundation for Heart Wellness, providing transportation and support for elderly and disabled patients, the kind of help I once needed and couldn't find from my own family. The house and everything in it will belong to Nora, who's been more of a daughter to me than any of you ever were." Clara's voice rose, sharp and furious. "You can't do that! We're your family!" I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "You canceled my doctor's appointment because brunch was more important. You're right, you are my family. That's why this hurts. But love doesn't erase accountability." Jenna was crying now, anger and shame mixing on her face. Elise sobbed quietly beside her. For a moment, the three of them looked like lost children again, the girls I'd once adored, but I knew it was too late for second chances. "This isn't revenge," I said quietly. "It's justice. I'm simply giving my love to the people who will treat it with care." Clara turned to Mr. Hayes. "You can't let her do this," she demanded. He raised an eyebrow. "It's legal. And final." The silence that followed was deafening. The fire crackled softly, and outside, rain began tapping against the window panes. Clara finally grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. "You'll regret this, Aunt Lydia," she spat. I smiled faintly. "No, Clara, I already regret ever trusting you." When the door slammed behind them, I let out a slow, trembling breath. My hands were shaking not from weakness, but from release. Nora appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "You all right?" "Yes," I said, leaning back against the chair. "Better than all right." For the first time in months, I felt light. Free. The air in the house seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves were exhaling years of disappointment. I looked at the folder still on the table, its pages fluttering slightly in the draft. The ink had barely dried, but the decision was eternal. They had come expecting wealth. They left with truth. And for me, that truth was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. You could have heard a pin drop after they walked out. For a long moment I just sat there, the echoes of their voices still hanging in the air like smoke. The clock ticked, the fire cracked, and I let myself breathe. It was over, or at least, I thought it was. I didn't yet understand that truth, once spoken aloud, keeps reverberating. It moves through families like a storm front, breaking windows you didn't even know were fragile. Nora appeared quietly beside me with a blanket and a cup of chamomile. "They didn't take it well," she said. "They weren't meant to," I replied. "They were meant to hear it." We both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that comes from exhaustion, not humor. Then the house settled into a strange, pleasant quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. But peace never lasts long when greed feels cornered. The first message came that same night. Clara's number flashed on my phone, 6 missed calls in a row, followed by a text. "You're being manipulated. Call me before you make a mistake." Then Jenna, "This isn't fair. We were just talking hypothetically." And Elise, dear Elise, left a voicemail full of tears. "Please don't shut us out. We can fix this, Aunt Lydia. I'll come tomorrow." I didn't answer any of them. I turned off the phone and went to bed. Sleep came easily. Conscience is a marvelous pillow when you've finally used it. By morning, the fight had gone public. My phone buzzed with alerts from friends in town. Jenna had posted a long, cryptic paragraph on social media about toxic relatives and money being stolen by outsiders. Clara commented supportive emojis. Elise, mercifully, stayed silent. I scrolled through the thread once, then set the phone face down again. They were unraveling exactly as I expected. Around noon there was pounding on the door. Clara stood there in the drizzle, her eyes rimmed red but her stance full of fury. "Aunt Lydia, you can't just cut us off like that," she said, marching past me, into the living room without waiting to be invited. I followed her calmly. "I didn't cut you off, Clara," I corrected an imbalance. "An imbalance?" she snapped. "You're being taken advantage of by that lawyer and the maid. Nora," I corrected. "Her name is Nora." Clara folded her arms. "Fine, Nora. Whatever. She's convinced you we're horrible people. But we love you. Love doesn't cancel cardiology appointments," I said. Her mouth opened and closed. She hadn't expected me to throw that stone so directly. "You know what?" she said finally. "You're sick. You shouldn't even be making these decisions. When this all comes out in court..." "Court?" I repeated, almost amused. "You'd drag me through that? If that's what it takes to stop this nonsense, yes." I smiled faintly. "Then I suggest you call Mr. Hayes. He's already prepared for you." For a second, she looked genuinely uncertain. Then she muttered something under her breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. After she left, Nora peeked in from the hallway. "Well," she said, "that one's not giving up." "No," I said, "but she's already lost." Over the next few days, the rest followed the same pattern. Jenna tried a softer approach, sending flowers with a card that said, "Let's talk." The irony wasn't lost on me. She couldn't talk when I needed her, but now that money was on the line, she found her voice quickly enough. I put the bouquet on the porch for the wind to have. Elise, however, came in person. She stood at the door looking small and damp, clutching a box of lemon bars. "I baked for you," she said. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared countless cups of tea over the years. For a while, she said nothing. Then, softly, "I'm sorry." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach across the table and tell her, everything could be mended, but forgiveness without change is just a different kind of weakness. "I appreciate that," I said. "But you need to understand this isn't about punishment, it's about truth." She nodded, tears welling. "I know. I was selfish. We all were. I don't deserve anything." "No," I said quietly. "But you deserve to learn from it." We sat in silence for a moment before she left, leaving the box of lemon bars behind. I never ate them, but I didn't throw them away either. They reminded me that guilt can still carry a trace of sincerity. A few days later, Mr. Hayes called. "Lydia," he said. "Your nieces have contacted an attorney. They're claiming you were coerced into rewriting the will." I sighed. "Let them try. Everything's documented." "I thought you'd say that," he chuckled. "We'll handle it." What followed was chaos viewed through glass. I didn't have to step into the courtroom or face their accusations directly. Mr. Hayes managed everything. He told me later that the judge listened patiently as Clara and Jenna made their case teary stories of a frail old woman manipulated by her maid. But then he played the recording from that dinner. Their own voices sealed the matter. According to Mr. Hayes, the courtroom went silent except for the faint hiss of the playback device. When it ended, the judge simply said, "Case dismissed." Hearing that felt like the closing of a book I'd been trapped inside. After the ruling, small-town gossip did the rest. News travels faster than forgiveness here. People who once gushed over the Avery girls began crossing the street to avoid them. Clients pulled out of Clara's side business. Jenna lost a photography contract after the story spread. Elise moved quietly out of town. None of it was my doing. Truth just has a way of finding daylight. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt instead was peace deep, still peace. My evenings were calm again. I read novels by the fire, tended to my plants, and sometimes wrote letters to Mark in the margins of my journal. Nora and I fell into an easy rhythm. She'd hum old songs while she cooked, and the house no longer echoed with loneliness. One afternoon, she handed me a cup of tea and said, "You really did it, Miss Lydia. You got your justice." I looked out the window at the soft spring light and nodded. Yes. But more than that, I got my quiet back. Days turned into weeks, and the silence held. Every so often, I'd think of them, the three girls I'd once called my legacy, and I'd genuinely hope that they were learning something out there in the wreckage. Maybe humility, maybe compassion, maybe nothing at all. But it was no longer my burden to carry. I tucked the official court papers away in my desk drawer, beneath the old photographs I couldn't yet throw out. The faces in those pictures still smiled, frozen in a time before greed took root. I let them stay there as a reminder. Love given freely is a gift, but love demanded becomes a debt. That night, before bed, I wrote in my journal, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, 'Enough.'" And as I set the pen down, I realized the ache in my chest was lighter, quieter, almost gone. They had wanted my money, they had wanted my silence. Now they had neither. Justice, for once, was on the side of the betrayed. They didn't realize I'd prepared for every move they'd make. The morning the summons arrived, Nora found the envelope on the porch, sealed in expensive paper with Clara's handwriting scrawled across the front. She handed it to me with raised eyebrows. "It begins," she said quietly. I opened it slowly, scanning the neat legal phrases. Petition to contest will, alleging undue influence and mental incapacity. In plain language, they were calling me too old and too sick to know my own mind. I laughed, a small, humorless sound. "They think they can win this," I said. "They think they can scare you," Nora replied. I called Mr. Hayes that afternoon. He was already expecting it. "I told you they'd try," he said. "But you've given me everything I need. What happens now?" I asked. "We let them talk," he said. "And then we show the truth." The first hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later at the county courthouse. I arrived early, walking slowly but without help. I wanted them to see me steady, calm, alive. Clara stood with her attorney in the hallway, dressed in sharp gray, the picture of righteous indignation. Jenna hovered behind her, scrolling nervously through her phone. Elise kept her eyes down, wringing her hands. When Clara saw me, she offered a thin smile. "You look well, Aunt Lydia. I hope you'll come to your senses before this gets ugly." I met her gaze. "Clara, it's already ugly. You just can't see your reflection yet." Inside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. The judge, a woman with silver hair and the patience of a stone, called us to order. Their lawyer began with a speech about family betrayal, claiming Nora and Mr. Adovix's Hayes had manipulated a fragile woman into disinheriting her blood relatives. Each word was polished, rehearsed, dripping with pity. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching the performance. Clara dabbed at imaginary tears. Jenna nodded at every accusation. Elise just stared at the table. When the time came for our side, Mr. Hayes rose slowly, unhurried. "Your Honor," he began, "the petitioners claim my client lacks capacity. I intend to prove she possesses clarity they cannot afford." He called me first. I took the stand, swore the oath, and met the judge's eyes. "Mrs. Avery," she said, "do you understand the nature of the document in question?" "I do, Your Honor," I answered. "It's my will. I wrote it with full intent, because I finally saw my family for who they were." Mr. Hayes guided me through the story, my illness, the canceled appointment, the dinner, the recording. Each detail felt both painful and freeing. When he played the audio for the court, the same laughter and greedy chatter that had filled my dining room spilled into the sterile space of justice. The effect was electric. Clara's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised her hand. "Overruled." "I'd like to hear this." The recording ended with my own voice, calm and clear. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Silence followed. Even the bailiff seemed to hold his breath. Mr. Hayes smiled faintly. "Your Honor, this is the mind of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing." Clara shot to her feet. "She was manipulated. Look at her, she's sick. She doesn't even drive anymore." The judge turned her gaze to me. "Mrs. Avery, are you under anyone's control?" "No, ma'am," I said. "In fact, I think this is the first time in years I'm not." The judge nodded. "That's enough, Miss Reynolds," she said to Clara's attorney. "Sit down." "Next," Nora testified. Her voice was soft but steady as she described the weeks leading up to my new will. The phone calls ignored, the canceled appointment, the silence. "She didn't need my advice," Nora said. "She just needed space to see things clearly. I only drove her to the lawyer's office and made sure she ate lunch afterward. When she finished, I saw even Elise wipe a tear from her cheek. Finally, Mr. Hayes submitted the documentation, my medical evaluations, showing stable cognitive health, my handwritten notes, even the receipts from my charitable trust. Each page was another nail in the coffin of their case. Their attorney tried one last argument, something about family unity and natural heirs. But the judge wasn't swayed. She looked directly at Clara, then Jenna, then Elise. "This isn't about fairness," she said. "It's about intent, and Mrs. Avery's intent is as clear as day." Her gavel came down with a decisive crack. "The will stands as written. Case dismissed." It was over in less than 2 hours. Outside the courthouse, the wind smelled like rain. I paused on the steps, breathing deeply. Clara brushed past me without a word. Jenna's eyes were red, though whether from anger or shame I couldn't tell. Elise lingered a moment, whispering, "I'm sorry." I nodded, and she walked away. Hayes placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You handled that beautifully, Lydia." "I just told the truth," I said. He smiled. "That's rarer than you think." When I got home, Nora had prepared dinner and set out a bottle of wine. "To the end of chaos," she said, raising her glass. "To peace," I replied. Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread quietly through town. People talked, of course they did. Stories travel fast when money's involved. Some sympathized with me, others whispered that I'd been too harsh. But the ones who mattered most, the nurses at the clinic, the volunteers at the charity, understood exactly why I'd done it. They began calling me not a victim, but an example. The Avery Foundation gained attention faster than I imagined. Donations poured in. We bought our first van within a month, white with blue lettering that read, "For those who need a ride." Watching it pull out of the driveway for its first patient run made me cry, not from sadness, but relief. Something good had finally come out of all that pain. Then, one morning, I received a letter from the court, reimbursement of legal fees. It meant Clara and Jenna were now responsible for covering every dollar I'd spent defending myself. I didn't rejoice, but I did allow myself a small smile. Consequence, I thought, was the universe's most elegant teacher. Days grew longer, warmer, my heart grew steadier. Sometimes, in the late afternoons, I'd sit on the porch with Nora, sipping tea while the van returned from its route. The driver, a young volunteer named Beth, always waved, and every time, I waved back, thinking, this is what legacy should look like. One evening, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but lighter. The lines around my mouth were no longer bitterness. They were survival. I realized that revenge had quietly turned into redemption. That night, before turning in, I opened my journal and wrote, "They tried to use the law to steal what love couldn't earn. The law chose truth instead." I closed the book, feeling the steady rhythm of my heart against my palm. It beat calmly, evenly, a reminder that healing isn't always gentle, but it's always possible. Justice had spoken, not with fury but with fact, and for the first time in a long, long while, I slept without dreaming of betrayal. Justice, for once, was finally undeniably mine. For the first time in years, I woke up without bitterness weighing me down. Sunlight spilled across the quilt, warm and honest, touching the walls that had once felt like a cage. The court case was over, the noise had faded, and the air inside my chest felt wide enough for breath again. Healing, I realized, doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly after the storm, testing the windows before it enters. Nora still came every morning at 8, humming as she opened the curtains. "You slept through the night," she said one day. astonished. I suppose peace is a fine sedative, I told her, and we both laughed. I began to notice small things I'd ignored while consumed by anger. The sound of the robins returning to the maple tree, the faint scent of lavender from the garden Mark had planted years ago, the way morning light turned the dust in the air into tiny golden stars. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Some days my heart ached, not from the illness, but from the space revenge had vacated. I'd spent so long burning with purpose that the quiet almost frightened me. But I learned to fill it with something softer. I started walking again, short routes at first, through the neighborhood and down to the post office. People stopped me often, neighbors, shopkeepers, even strangers, offering shy smiles and words of admiration. "Good for you, Miss Avery," they'd say. About time someone stood up for themselves. I always smiled back, though inside I whispered, it wasn't about standing up, it was about standing still long enough for the truth to show. At home, Nora and I worked on the Avery Foundation. The first transport van had already helped dozens of elderly patients reach their appointments. Sometimes I'd ride along just to talk with them. They told me stories about their families, their fears, their hopes. Each trip felt like stitching a torn piece of humanity back together. One woman, Ruth, reminded me of myself, a widow with a weak heart and too much silence in her house. As the driver helped her out of the van, she said, "Whoever started this program must have an angel watching over them." I smiled. Or maybe she finally started watching over herself. Those rides healed me more than any medicine could. They reminded me that revenge, if you strip away its venom, is simply the act of giving your pain a purpose. But healing wasn't linear. Some evenings, I'd still sit by the fire and think about my nieces. I'd picture Clara pacing her small apartment, furious that her control had slipped away. Jenna staring at her empty calendar, wondering how her reputation unraveled. Elise trying to rebuild something genuine from the ashes. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't love them either. I simply hoped they'd learn. One rainy night, a letter arrived, handwritten in careful, looping script. It was from Elise. "Dear Aunt Lydia, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Losing the inheritance hurt, but losing your trust hurt more. I see now how blind we were. I've started volunteering at a senior center. I think of you every time I help someone get to their doctor. Thank you for teaching me a lesson I didn't know I needed." I read it twice, tears smudging the ink. The next morning I wrote her back. "Dear Elise, forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a door. You've already opened it. Keep walking." It was the first time I'd written her in months, and it felt right. Slowly, my days filled with rhythm instead of rumination. I joined a support group for heart patients at the local clinic, the same one that had once turned me away because Clara canceled my appointment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked into the meeting room with a smile, knowing I'd earned every step. The others welcomed me with open arms. We shared stories, fears, and small victories. Some were angry at life, others were just tired. I told them about boundaries, about choosing peace over guilt. I never mentioned names or money, only that sometimes the people you love most can become your heaviest chains. One evening after group, a woman my age touched my arm. "You talk about revenge like it saved you," she said. I thought for a moment, then nodded. Maybe it did, but only because I used it to build something instead of destroy. I could tell she didn't fully understand, and that was fine. Not everyone needs to walk through fire to appreciate the warmth that follows. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, and my garden exploded with color. Nora and I planted new flowers, marigolds, peonies, and a patch of mint near the porch. When I knelt in the dirt, my pulse steady and strong, I realized how far I'd come from that trembling woman who once waited by the window for a ride that never came. Healing had taken time, yes, but revenge had given me momentum. It had forced me to move when grief wanted me still. Sometimes I caught myself humming while I cooked dinner, the same tune Mark used to whistle. I'd stop, smile, and whisper, "We did it. Love." We finally found peace. On warm evenings, I sat outside with Nora, a glass of lemonade between us, watching the sunset melt into gold and rose. You think they'll ever come around? She asked one night. Maybe, I said. But if they don't, that's their lesson to learn. She nodded. You've done your part. Yes, I said softly. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Later, before bed, I opened my journal and wrote, Healing isn't the absence of anger. It's knowing you could strike again and choosing not to. Revenge taught me where to draw the line. Healing taught me when to stop tracing it. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and lay back against the pillow. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock, steady, reassuring, alive. Somewhere in town, people still whispered about the inheritance scandal. Some thought I was cruel, others called me brave, but I didn't owe anyone a narrative. My story was mine, written in my own hand, signed with clarity instead of apology. That night, as the wind brushed through the open window, I thought about the phrase Clara had thrown at me all those months ago. You'll be fine. She'd said it to dismiss me, but now, lying there with a calm heart and a conscience clean of guilt, I whispered it again, this time to myself, and this time, true. You'll be fine, Lydia. Better than fine. Because I'd learned something no doctor could prescribe. Sometimes revenge is the shock that restarts the heart, and healing is the steady beat that keeps it going. I turned out the light, the darkness gentle around me, and smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel alive. I felt whole. Karma has a strange sense of timing. It never rushes, it simply waits until the echo of your actions circles back to find you. Months had passed since the court case, enough time for the gossip to quiet and my garden to bloom again. The days were peaceful mornings, filled with tea and sunlight, evenings with Nora's laughter drifting through the kitchen. I thought the drama was finished. Then, one gray afternoon, Justice decided to knock once more, this time wearing Clara's name. It began with a phone call I almost didn't answer. Miss Avery? A clipped voice asked. This is Detective Harris from the County Fraud Division. I'm sorry to bother you, but I understand you're related to a Miss Clara Denton. My stomach tightened. She's my niece, I said cautiously. What's this about? There's an ongoing investigation involving her real estate firm. We're contacting former clients and relatives for background. I could hear the shuffle of papers on his desk. She's suspected of diverting client deposits into a private account. It may take months to resolve, but I thought you should be aware. I thanked him, hung up, and sat perfectly still. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, soft at first, then louder, as if the universe wanted to underscore the moment. When I told Nora, she simply raised an eyebrow. Guess her double shifts finally caught up with her, she said. I sighed. I don't take joy in it. No, she agreed. But it does feel balanced, doesn't it? Balanced. That was the word. I didn't gloat, I just felt the quiet symmetry of consequence. A week later, the story broke in the local paper. Real estate manager under investigation for misappropriation of funds. They didn't need to print her full name, everyone knew. Her photo sat above the fold. The same polished smile she'd worn to my dinner table that night. She'd spoken of selling my house for a profit. I clipped the article and slipped it into my journal. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth always grows roots. Soon, the town began to whisper. Clients demanded refunds, co-workers distanced themselves. The woman who once strutted through the farmer's market with perfect hair and endless confidence now ducked her head beneath a plain cap, rushing past old neighbors who no longer waved. Then, one evening, my phone rang again, her number. For a moment I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the aunt who'd raised her like a daughter, needed to hear her voice. I pressed answer. Aunt Lydia? I don't know who else to call. What is it, Clara? They're saying terrible things about me. Half of them aren't true. Her breath hitched. Could you talk to them? Maybe tell people I'd never do something like this? I closed my eyes. The memory of her cold voice canceling my appointment flickered behind my lids. Clara, I said softly. The truth doesn't need a spokesperson. If you're innocent, it will defend itself. She was silent for a long moment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? she finally snapped. You think this is justice? I think this is consequence, I replied. There's a difference. Then I ended the call. For days afterward, guilt and peace wrestled inside me. I didn't wish her harm, just awareness. But perhaps awareness never arrives gently. Weeks passed. Each morning, the headlines told me a little more. Charges filed, assets frozen, business shuttered. Eventually, she was forced to sell her apartment to pay legal fees. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she'd moved into a small rental on the edge of town. Alone. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I came across the folder labeled Estate Planning, Original Draft. Her name sat neatly beside her sister's, each followed by the word beneficiary. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it into the shredder. The paper disappeared in thin ribbons, and with it, the last trace of obligation I owed her. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea and my journal. The house was quiet except for the crackle of wood and the steady rhythm of rain on the windows. I opened to a fresh page and began to write. Justice doesn't require applause. It just asks that we stop interfering long enough for it to do its work. As I wrote, a wave of something unexpected washed over me, pity. Not forgiveness exactly, but a soft grief for the girl Clara used to be. The bright-eyed child who once helped me bake cookies and promised to buy me a big house someday. Where had that child gone? Perhaps swallowed by the same hunger that made her cancel my appointment without a second thought. I remembered Mark once saying, "People show their truth when they think no one's watching." I realized now that karma watches when we don't. A few days later, Nora came in holding another envelope. "From the county clerk," she said. Inside was a restitution notice, formal confirmation that Clara had reached a plea agreement, avoiding jail but losing her license and most of her savings. She would spend 5 years on probation and perform community service. Community service, I murmured. Imagine that. Maybe she'll drive people to their appointments now, Nora chuckled. Wouldn't that be poetic? That evening I drove to the lake, the same one near the retreat where I'd healed months earlier. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. I parked by the water and watched the sunset bleed into the horizon. The ripples on the surface shimmered like broken glass turning to gold. I whispered into the wind, "You see, Mark? I didn't have to destroy her. She did it herself." A strange calm settled over me, then part sadness, part relief. It struck me that revenge hadn't made me cruel. It had simply restored equilibrium. Clara's downfall wasn't something I orchestrated. It was gravity. Every choice she made pulled her there. Back home, I placed the restitution notice in my journal behind the article clipping. Then I added a single line beneath both. The niece who canceled my doctor's appointment finally canceled her own future. I stared at the sentence for a long time before closing the book. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt finished. When I turned out the lights, the house sighed around me, content and still. I crawled into bed and whispered a quiet prayer, not for revenge, but for release. Maybe, I thought, if she ever truly understood what she'd done, she could start over. Everyone deserves at least the chance to rise from their own wreckage. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, fading into rain. I let it lull me toward sleep, the sound steady as a heartbeat. Karma had done her work, and I didn't need to lift another finger. The circle had closed. The dominoes continued to fall, one niece at a time. Clara's scandal had cracked the silence wide open, and through that crack the rest of the truth began to pour. I'd thought her downfall might shock the others into reflection, but greed seldom travels alone. It brings pride and fear to keep it company. Within months, both Jenna and Elise found their own reckonings waiting patiently at their doors. It began with Jenna. One sunny afternoon, Nora was flipping through the local paper when she said, "You'll want to see page 5. I glanced at the headline. Photographer faces lawsuit over client deposits. There she was, Jenna Thorne Photography, the same business I'd once helped her start with a generous loan she'd never repaid. Several couples had filed complaints, claiming she'd accepted wedding deposits and never delivered the photos. My stomach turned. The article mentioned financial strain following a family dispute, and I didn't need to guess which dispute that meant. For days I wrestled with disappointment more than anger. I had hoped she might learn from Clara's example, but instead she doubled down on denial, trying to fill the hole her greed had dug by digging faster. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, Jenna's handwriting again, looping and uncertain. I opened it slowly. Aunt Lydia, I know you've probably heard the rumors. They're exaggerating. I was just behind on deadlines, but people love drama. I wish we could talk. Maybe if we'd stayed closer, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. There was no apology, only self-pity dressed as nostalgia. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it between the pages of my journal. Some lessons, I realized, must come from silence. By midsummer, her photography studio closed. She sold her cameras online, and word spread that she and her husband were separating. He'd discovered she'd borrowed against their savings to fund new equipment right before the lawsuits hit. The woman who once documented other people's happiest moments now couldn't frame her own. When neighbors asked if I felt vindicated, I said no. Vindication suggests victory. I told them. This isn't a contest, it's a reckoning. Still, at night, when the house was quiet, I would whisper a small hope into the dark. Please let her learn before it's too late. Elisa's fall came more quietly, but it cut deeper. She had always been the gentle one, the bridge between her sisters and me. After the court case, she'd moved to a nearby town and found work at a small marketing firm. Every few weeks, she'd send brief notes, simple things like thinking of you or hope you're well. I answered politely but kept my distance. Trust, like health, takes time to rebuild. Then, one autumn morning, she appeared on my porch. Her hair was shorter, her eyes older. She carried no gifts this time, only a sealed envelope and a tremor in her hands. I won't stay long, she said. I just need to give you this. Inside was a handwritten confession, a mixture of apology and confession that spilled across 3 pages. Aunt Lydia, I was ashamed to see you after everything. When Clara started the lawsuit, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop her. I told myself staying quiet made me loyal, but really it made me cowardly. I've lost friends, I've lost my job, and I think I finally understand what you meant about consequences. I'm starting therapy next week. I want to be better. When I finished reading, she looked at me as if awaiting a verdict. Sit down, Elise, I said softly. We sat together at the kitchen table, the same spot where years ago she'd braided my hair and giggled over tea. Now the silence between us carried the weight of everything broken. I don't hate you, I told her. But forgiveness isn't a shortcut. It's work. I know, she whispered. I'll do the work. For the first time in years, I believed her. Before she left, I handed her a small envelope of my own. Inside was a check for a modest amount and a note that read, "For therapy sessions only. Healing is the only inheritance I can offer you now." Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Aunt Lydia. Don't thank me yet, I said. Thank yourself when you use it. After she drove away, I stood on the porch watching the taillights disappear into the mist. Something in my chest loosened. Maybe revenge had run its course. Maybe compassion could take its place, not the blind kind that forgives everything, but the clear-eyed mercy that demands accountability first. Autumn turned to winter again. The nights grew longer, the air crisp with wood smoke. I spent my evenings knitting scarves for the patients the foundation now served. Our 2 transport vans ran full schedules, and a small office had opened downtown. I visited once a week, greeting the volunteers who now called me Miss Avery with genuine affection. They didn't know my history. They just knew I'd fought to give people the help I once needed. One afternoon, while sorting donations, Nora handed me a small parcel with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph. Elise, standing beside one of the foundation vans, smiling. On the back, she'd written, "Still doing the work." I placed it on the mantel beside Mark's photo. The 2 smiles belong together, proof that redemption, when it arrives, can be quiet and sincere. Jenna's path, sadly, took longer. I heard she moved out west to stay with friends, taking odd photography gigs and trying to rebuild her reputation. Every few months, a postcard would appear in my mailbox, pictures of deserts, mountains, and oceans, always unsigned but unmistakably hers. Each one felt like a whisper from a distance. I'm still trying. I kept them all in a small wooden box labeled Unfinished Lessons. Some nights, when the wind howled through the chimney, I'd take them out, fan them across my lap, and think of how differently life could have turned if greed hadn't spoken louder than love. But even then, I found no bitterness left, only understanding. People often say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Time alone does nothing. It's what we do with it, how we confront our mistakes, how we grow from pain that mends us. Clara, Jenna, and Elise were learning that truth in their own painful ways. And I, in turn, was learning mine. That closure isn't about watching others fall, but about knowing you can stand steady when they do. One snowy evening, Nora found me staring out the window at the flakes drifting past the porch light. "You thinking about them?" she asked. "Always," I said. "But not with anger anymore." She smiled. "You've got a good heart, Miss Lydia. Maybe, or maybe I just know what it's like to lose one." We laughed softly, and I realized that the ache had finally dulled. What remained wasn't vengeance, it was wisdom, polished by grief. Before bed that night, I wrote in my journal, "The storm passed through every branch of this family tree. Some limbs broke, some bent and grew back stronger. I can't fix what snapped, but I can choose what grows next." I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and listened to the snow against the window. They had each met their reckoning, one through scandal, one through failure, one through remorse. The circle of consequence was complete, and for the first time I could look at their names without feeling heat in my chest. Sometimes silence is the loudest form of revenge. And sometimes, it's the first note of forgiveness. Revenge had cleared the wreckage, now it was time to build again. When the dust finally settled, I stood in the middle of my life and realized how much space there was. For years, that space had frightened me. I used to fill every empty corner with people who took and took, because silence felt like abandonment. But once the noise was gone, I could hear something better underneath. Possibility. Mornings became rituals instead of routines. I brewed coffee slowly, listening to the gentle hiss of the kettle. I fed the robins that gathered on the porch railing, scattering crumbs and whispers of gratitude. I even began painting again, something I hadn't done since Mark died. My brushstrokes were clumsy at first, but each line of color felt like oxygen seeping back into my lungs. Nora noticed. "You're different, Miss Lydia," she said one afternoon, watching me clean paint from my fingers. "I think I'm finally living for myself," I told her. "Not for how others see me." The Avery Foundation grew faster than I ever imagined. What started as one van became 3. Volunteers came from neighboring towns, eager to be part of something honest. Every week I visited the office, bringing homemade muffins and words of encouragement. They called me the heartbeat of the foundation. I liked that. For once, my weak heart was a strength instead of a limitation. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our new office, the mayor shook my hand and said, "You turned pain into purpose, Mrs. Avery." I smiled. It was the only thing strong enough to carry the pain. Later that day, I walked alone through the building, the soft hum of printers, the laughter of volunteers, the quiet gratitude of patients waiting for rides. It all felt like music. This was the symphony I'd built from betrayal, harmony born out of chaos. Still, healing doesn't erase memory. Some nights, I'd sit by the fire with my journal and reread old entries, the angry ones, the vengeful ones. I didn't recognize the woman who wrote them, but I honored her. She had fought for my survival when I was too frightened to fight for it myself. Without her rage, I'd still be waiting by a window for people who never came. I started spending more time outside. The garden Mark planted had long since overgrown, but I decided to bring it back to life. Nora helped me dig through tangled roots while the smell of fresh soil filled the air. "This garden's been waiting for you," she said. "Maybe I've been waiting for it," I replied. We planted new seeds, lavender, peonies, tomatoes, herbs. As the weeks passed, green shoots broke through the earth like tiny promises. Watching them grow reminded me that rebirth doesn't erase the ashes. It uses them. One afternoon, while tending the garden, I found one of Mark's old tools half buried in the dirt, a small trowel with his initials carved into the handle. I cleaned it off and placed it by the porch steps. It felt symbolic. Even in decay, love leaves something useful behind. As summer stretched into fall, the house became lively again. Not with relatives expecting handouts, but with volunteers dropping by, neighbors visiting for tea, children laughing as they helped Nora pick apples. For the first time in decades, my home felt full of life rather than obligation. One evening, a young volunteer named Beth brought her grandmother to meet me. "She's one of our patients," Beth said. "Wanted to thank you in person." The older woman clasped my hands. "Because of your foundation, I made every one of my appointments this year. You saved my life." Tears filled my eyes. I'd started this journey because someone once decided my life wasn't worth a drive. Now, because of that cruelty, countless others were being driven toward hope. It was poetic in a way only life could arrange. After they left, Nora poured 2 glasses of cider. "You did all this," she said. "We did," I corrected her. She smiled. "You're starting to sound like your old self again." I shook my head. "No. My old self would have forgiven too quickly. This one forgives carefully." Every now and then, I'd hear small updates about my nieces. Clara had taken a clerical job in another state. Jenna was teaching photography at a community center. Elise continued her therapy and occasionally sent me letters short, humble, hopeful. Each note ended with the same line: "Still doing the work." Sometimes I wrote back. Sometimes I just folded the letter into my journal. I didn't need constant proof of their remorse. The fact that they were trying was enough. One day, Elise visited again. She looked healthier, steadier. She brought me a small wooden charm she'd made in therapy, 2 intertwined hearts. "It's a reminder," she said, "that love and accountability can exist together." I hung it by the kitchen window, where the morning sun touched it first each day. As the year turned, I decided to write a memoir not for publication, just for truth. I titled it Cancelled, a story of family and freedom. Page by page, I chronicled everything: the betrayal, the will, the court, the redemption. It was strange, reliving it all, but also liberating. Words became the final thread stitching my heart back together. When I finished the last chapter, I read the ending aloud to Nora. Forgiveness isn't about reopening old doors. It's about building new ones where light can enter. She wiped a tear and said, "You should share this with the world." "Maybe someday," I said. "For now, it's enough that it exists." As autumn gave way to winter again, I decorated the house for the holidays, something I hadn't done since Mark passed. The trees sparkled with old ornaments, each one carrying a memory. I placed a small framed photo of him on the mantel beside a candle and whispered, "We made it through, love." The fire didn't destroy us, it refined us. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in silence. I wrapped myself in a shawl, stepped onto the porch, and watched the flakes drift down. The night was quiet except for the faint sound of the foundation vans returning from their routes. Their headlights swept across the yard like guardian angels. I thought about everything that had happened: the pain, the loss, the vindication, the healing, and realized I no longer measured my life in what was taken from me, but in what I'd chosen to create after. The ashes were still there, buried beneath the new growth, but they no longer frightened me. They were proof that I'd survived the fire. Before heading inside, I whispered into the snow-lit air, "Thank you for the betrayal, it taught me boundaries. Thank you for the silence, it taught me peace. Thank you for the ashes, they taught me how to bloom." When I returned to the warmth of the house, Nora had left the kettle on, the smell of cinnamon tea filling the kitchen. I poured a cup, sat by the fire, and opened my journal to a fresh page. Rebuilding isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing what deserves to stay. I signed my name, closed the book, and smiled. The woman they once ignored had become the one everyone looked up to. Some people think revenge is about destruction, but mine was about freedom. It had been nearly a year since the storm began, and life had finally settled into something quiet, something whole. The house no longer echoed with longing or resentment, it hummed with purpose. Every morning I woke to the scent of coffee and the soft footsteps of Nora. In the kitchen, the creak of the porch, the song of birds outside the window. For the first time in decades, I wasn't surviving, I was living. The Avery Foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. We now had 4 vans, a full staff of volunteers, and a waiting list of people wanting to help. Sometimes, when I watched the drivers pull out each morning, I thought of the version of me who once sat alone by the window, waiting for a niece who never came. I wished I could tell her that the heartbreak she felt that day would one day become someone else's salvation. The irony still made me smile. They canceled my doctor's appointment. I created a service that made sure no one would ever be stranded again. They took away my care, and in response, I built a legacy of compassion. That was the difference between us. They used love as a tool. I turned pain into purpose. Nora once said to me, "You took revenge, but you also found redemption in the same breath." She was right. My revenge wasn't about money or humiliation, it was about truth. It was about reminding myself that kindness without boundaries isn't virtue, it's self-destruction. One crisp spring morning, I visited the hospital for a routine checkup. My doctor, a warm-hearted woman named Dr. Patel, smiled as she reviewed my chart. "Your heart's stronger," she said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I laughed. It's amazing what peace can do for the body. When I left the clinic, I noticed one of the foundation vans parked out front. A volunteer was helping an elderly man with a walker. The sight stopped me cold because that used to be me, depending on others to care. Now, I was the one providing care to the world. The circle had turned completely, and it was beautiful. I walked over to them, introduced myself, and the man's eyes lit up. "You're the one who started all this," he said. "I can't thank you enough. You already have," I told him, "just by using it." As they drove away, I stood on the curb for a long time, the wind tugging at my scarf. My heart beat slow and steady, not just alive, strong. That night, I sat by the fire with my journal, the same one that had carried every stage of this journey. Betrayal, rage, clarity, revenge, and healing. I flipped through its pages, marveling at the transformation of my own handwriting from shaky scrawls filled with anger to steady lines of peace. I'd written my way out of darkness. Every word had been a step toward freedom. I wrote one last entry. "A year ago, I thought I was dying from illness, from grief, from disappointment. But I wasn't dying. I was shedding the version of myself that mistook love for loyalty and silence for peace." They canceled my doctor's appointment and thought they canceled my life. But all they did was give me a reason to start again. I closed the book, set it on the mantel beside Mark's photograph, and whispered, "We did it." His picture seemed to smile back, caught in the flicker of the firelight. A few weeks later, I received a letter handwritten, shaky, but familiar. It was from Clara. "Aunt Lydia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something. I've been attending a program for people who've lost everything because of their own choices. For the first time, I'm not blaming anyone else. I see what I did, and I see what it cost me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand now." I read it twice, my chest tight with something that wasn't anger anymore, it was release. I didn't write her back, but I placed the letter in my journal beside Elise's, proof that even broken people can find a way to face themselves. Jenna wrote once too, months later, a postcard from the coast. "Still taking pictures, trying to see beauty again." That was all it said, but it was enough. One afternoon, the foundation hosted an anniversary event. Reporters came, local, politicians, and dozens of families who'd been helped over the past year. As I stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell quiet. I looked out at their faces, smiling, alive, grateful, and felt an overwhelming rush of purpose. "I started this foundation because once upon a time, someone canceled my care," I said. "I thought that meant my story was over. But sometimes, the worst endings hide the best beginnings. The pain we survive becomes the compassion we offer. I don't stand here as a victim, but as proof that it's never too late to rewrite your life." The applause was thunderous, But I wasn't speaking for praise. I was speaking for the woman I used to be, the one who thought kindness had to mean surrender. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone wiser, someone freer. After the event, a young volunteer approached me. She said shyly, "I'm just someone who finally stopped waiting for others to do the right thing." As the year came to a close, I hosted a small gathering at the house. Nora, the volunteers, a few close friends. The fireplace glowed, laughter filled the rooms, and for once, it felt like family. Real family, the kind built from kindness, not blood. After everyone left, I stood alone in the living room, gazing at the framed photos lining the mantel. Mark, the foundation vans, smiling patients, and one of me and Nora in the garden. Muddy and laughing. My life, rebuilt from ashes, looked nothing like the one I lost, and I was grateful for that. I thought about the word inheritance. People always think it means money or property, but that's the smallest kind. The real inheritance we leave behind is the imprint of how we loved, how we endured, and how we turned pain into power. My nieces had inherited my lesson, even if they didn't know it yet. Before bed, I stepped outside one last time. The night was clear. The sky, heavy with stars. I wrapped my shawl tight and whispered to the quiet air. "You canceled my doctor's appointment, so I canceled your inheritance. But in doing so, I saved myself." It wasn't vengeance anymore, it was truth. A declaration of survival. I turned to go inside, but before closing the door, I looked back at the starlit garden alive, thriving, full of color even under moonlight. And for the first time since Mark's death, I felt complete. They had taken so much from me, but in losing them, I had gained everything that mattered. Peace, purpose, and myself. I didn't just cancel their inheritance, I reclaimed my life,